I want you to imagine the man I left. David. Successful, handsome, universally admired. He was the picture of the American dream, a brilliant mind, immense wealth, and a future promised to me. Now, look at the man I married, Mark. David's bitterest, most obsessive business rival. A man David swore would stop at nothing to utterly ruin him. The international media called my decision the ultimate, scandalous betrayal. David, in his exclusive interviews, called it a calculated plot hatched by two greedy, conniving snakes. He told the entire world I divorced him because I was purely greedy, deeply cold, and a manipulative liar who saw a better financial opportunity. And you know what? He's right. I did lie to him. I was calculating. And yes, I married his enemy. But the real, terrifying question isn't if I betrayed David. The question is why. Why would I destroy a comfortable, secure life, jeopardize my own safety, and publicly humiliate myself by walking down the aisle with the one person David hated most on this earth? The answer is a devastating secret I had to carry for 3 agonizing years, a truth about David's criminal character, a truth that Mark knew, and a truth that involved a crime so monstrous. I had to choose between my husband's immediate ruin and my own eventual death. Now, before I reveal the shocking, layer-by-layer truth about the dark empire David was secretly running and why Mark, the man the world called the enemy, was the only person I could possibly trust to save me, tell me in the comments. What city are you watching us from? I need to know where I can find the strongest listeners, the ones who truly understand that behind every villain there is a story. And if you believe that justice is worth any price and any sacrifice, please hit that subscribe button right now to join our community. I promise you, the real reason I wore this wedding dress will chill you to the bone. My name is Sarah, and the beginning of my true story is not the moment I met a lover, but the moment I signed a document, the divorce decree. David thought I was simply unhappy, unfulfilled, seeking an easy escape from our marriage. I meticulously, painfully, allowed him to believe that narrative. I needed him to think I was the classic villain, the shallow, materialistic wife who just wanted a bigger fortune. The truth, hidden deep beneath that facade, was far more complex, far more terrifying, and far more dangerous. I met David when I was just 22 years old. He was already a formidable, rising star in the luxury real estate development world. He was magnetic, intensely ambitious, and he had an almost supernatural ability to make me feel like the most cherished, desired woman in his universe. Our early life together was a glossy, fast-paced fairy tale, private jets, sprawling penthouse apartments overlooking Central Park, and exclusive parties where we were always the most talked-about couple. But the perfect fairy tale was built, quite literally, on a foundation of shifting, unstable sand. David's ambition was not just healthy, it was absolute and pathological. He needed to win at all costs, and I began to see, with increasing horror, that the costs were often paid by the livelihoods and integrity of genuinely good people. I first encountered Mark, the man I would eventually marry, during a particularly hostile and vicious takeover bid David orchestrated. Mark was the legitimate CEO David was trying to push out. I remember overhearing David on a late-night call to his lawyers, his voice dripping with spite, laughing about how he was going to utterly destroy Mark's professional reputation and bankrupt his elderly family simply to acquire his prime coastal development property. The casual cruelty of it made me sick to my stomach. Later that week, I ran into Mark at a high society charity gala. He looked utterly defeated, his eyes hollowed out by stress. Out of some naive, desperate impulse to apologize for the evil my husband represented, I approached him. I simply said, "I'm sorry for what David is doing to you." Mark looked at me, not with the anger I expected, but with profound, heartbreaking pity. He leaned in and said, "Your husband is not just a shark, Sarah. He's a psychopath with a business degree. And one day, mark my words, you'll be one of his casualties." I was offended at the time and dismissed it as the bitter, vengeful words of a defeated man. But Mark's chilling warning stuck with me. Over the next year, the subtle cracks in David's perfect facade didn't just appear, they became deep, frightening canyons. He grew increasingly possessive, brutally controlling, and emotionally distant. He began to treat me less like his wife and partner and more like a prized accessory, something to be flawlessly displayed, perfectly polished, and absolutely controlled. I began spending long, silent nights alone in our sprawling, technologically advanced, yet utterly empty penthouse, staring at the glittering Manhattan skyline, feeling more desperately trapped than I ever had in my life. The golden cage was closing in. The real, final shift, the moment I knew I had to execute a dangerous escape plan, came exactly 6 months before I quietly filed for divorce. David's company, Sterling Developments, had been under a very quiet, low-key investigation by the SEC regarding some questionable land acquisition deals overseas. David was terrified of a federal audit. One fateful evening, he came home late, drunk, and shaking uncontrollably. He confessed to me, not out of any shred of love or remorse, but purely out of desperate, paralyzing fear, that his entire multi-billion-dollar empire was a massive house of meticulously constructed cards. He wasn't just leveraging debt, he was systematically laundering hundreds of millions of dollars for an extremely violent, highly organized international crime syndicate to finance his biggest projects. He showed me the damning evidence, encrypted ledger files on a hidden, military-grade drive concealed in his office safe. He explained, in chilling detail, that if he ever went down, the crime bosses would immediately come after me, his wife, because I was the co-signatory on many of the offshore shell companies used in the laundering process. He essentially confessed, in a drunken stupor, that he had knowingly and willingly signed my death warrant to protect his fortune and his ambition. My husband, the man who vowed to cherish and protect me, had deliberately and criminally endangered my life to keep his empire afloat. I was utterly paralyzed. I couldn't possibly go to the police. David had meticulously established through signed documents and public appearances that I was his closest, most trusted financial partner. If I exposed him, I would not only risk immediate imprisonment for complicity, but far worse, I risked vanishing entirely at the hands of the syndicate. I was utterly alone, a terrified prisoner trapped between a cold-blooded criminal husband and the unforgiving federal law. And this is where the enemy Mark became my only, terrifying option. I knew Mark had always maintained his integrity as a legitimate, clean businessman. I knew he was still fighting David bitterly in court over the hostile takeover. I knew, crucially, that he was the only person who truly understood the complex, fraudulent financial structure of David's company because David had literally stolen its architecture from him. In a state of pure desperation, I reached out to Mark through a secure, anonymous email, using a burner phone. We met secretly at a nearly abandoned coffee shop outside the city. I was physically trembling, barely able to hold the cup. I confessed every agonizing detail, the money laundering, the shell companies, and David's casual confession that he had endangered my life. Mark listened patiently, his face unreadable. He didn't gloat, he didn't demand proof. He looked at me with that same profound pity from years ago, only now it was mixed with a cold, focused, terrifying determination. Mark laid out the plan, speaking in low, clipped tones like a military strategist. You can't just quietly divorce him, Sarah. He is too smart, too malicious. He will take everything you own and leave you legally exposed and physically vulnerable. We need to create an impenetrable legal and public firewall. You need to file for divorce on your own terms, but then you need to publicly, sensationally align yourself with his biggest, most visible enemy, me. This will immediately blindside David and drive him into a state of blind, arrogant, personal rage, making him incredibly careless. While he focuses his entire legal and personal energy on destroying me in the media for stealing his wife, you and I will quietly work with my forensic audit team to collect the final, undeniable evidence needed to expose his entire criminal laundering operation. It was a cold, calculated, and terrifying plan that required the complete destruction of my own reputation. It required me to become the villain in the eyes of the entire world, including my own distant family. I had to file for divorce, cite vague, irreconcilable differences to prevent David from dragging my name through a criminal court immediately, and then, the hardest, most shocking part, I had to marry Mark. The marriage was entirely strategic. It wasn't about love, not initially anyway. It was the ultimate public legal shield. By marrying Mark, I was instantly joining his legal team. Any subsequent legal action David took against me could be immediately seen as hostile witness intimidation or an illegal attack on Mark's established business interests. It was the absolute checkmate move that would protect me from the federal investigation and the syndicate. I filed for divorce. David was initially stunned, but his overwhelming arrogance soon took over. He was convinced I was simply leaving him for another wealthier, more influential man. He never, ever suspected Mark. Then, 6 months later, the bomb exploded across every major news network. Mark and I announced our engagement. The media coverage was an absolute frenzy. The betrayal bride. Sterling's ex-wife runs off with his archenemy. David's reaction was exactly what Mark predicted: blinding, all-consuming, arrogant rage. He spent every minute on the phone with his lawyers, trying to freeze my assets and sue Mark for defamation and the laughable charge of theft of affection. He was so utterly consumed with the personal revenge plot against Mark that he completely ignored the quiet, meticulous forensic audit Mark's team was running on his company's encrypted financials. He played right into our hands. The wedding day finally arrived. It was set at a lavish, historic coastal venue, a venue David had always desperately wanted to buy for himself. He didn't know that Mark had quietly acquired the venue months earlier, specifically for this final confrontation. As I walked down the aisle towards Mark, the man who was both my husband's enemy and my unlikely, terrifying savior, I saw David. He had crashed the wedding. He stood defiantly at the back, flanked by his intimidating security detail, his face a mask of pure, shattered hatred and humiliating pride. He thought he was there to witness my downfall and interrupt the ceremony. As the priest reached the crucial moment and asked if anyone objected, David stepped forward, his voice loud, venomous, and shaking. "I object. This is a sham. Sarah, you're a deceitful liar. Mark, you're a common thief. You both deserve to burn for this public humiliation." Mark simply smiled, a cold, confident, and victorious smile that was not directed at the priest, but straight at David. He looked at David, then back at me. I took a final, deep, steadying breath. This was the terrifying moment of truth, the culmination of 3 years of lies. I stepped forward, my voice clear and ringing across the silent hall. "David, you're right. I did lie to you. But I didn't lie about being greedy. I lied about your crime. I didn't produce a document. I didn't need to call the police. That would have been too easy." Instead, Mark's lead legal partner, who was posing as my maid of honor, stepped forward, pressing a button on her tablet. Suddenly, all the massive TV screens positioned around the venue, which were originally intended to show our happy wedding photos, flashed and lit up with the cold, hard, encrypted ledger files of Sterling developments. The files detailing the multi-million-dollar money laundering operation. And then, the ultimate, damning sound, a crystal-clear voice note. David's own voice, recorded secretly months ago, confessing the entire crime and admitting he had knowingly jeopardized my life to save himself. The entire wedding party went silent in collective shock. David's powerful business partners gasped and immediately began to move away from him. The police, whom Mark had strategically stationed outside the venue, walked in and placed him under immediate arrest. He was led away in handcuffs, not for his broken heart, but for his colossal criminal empire. I married Mark that day, not for love, but for survival, and eventually, a quiet, profound, and deeply loyal love grew from that shared danger and that incredible act of mutual trust. David thought I was a greedy ex-wife seeking a larger fortune. I was actually the key witness who helped bring down his entire criminal enterprise. The greatest betrayal was not the woman leaving the husband for his rival. It was the husband who betrayed his innocent wife to organized crime. Tell me in the comments, did I choose wisely by marrying the enemy to save myself and expose the truth? Or did I go too far? And if you believe that sometimes the greatest love is found in the darkest alliances, please like the video and share it with a friend. Thank you for listening to my truth, the truth I risked everything to tell.